The dog bone looking piece is actually going to be 3 parts. We have the crank at 50 millimeters, the follower at 80 millimeters, and the coupler at 160 millimeters. So we need to open up a new part. And we're going to check our, go into my default. Alright, so I have the warm kitchen. We're in millimeters, grams, and seconds. If I wanted to check the units, I can come down and edit document units, see what possibly changed. We have 2 decimal places, or dual dimension 3 decimal places, so not quite sure what's making this this custom as opposed to just MMGS, but we'll stay with it. And we're going to go through the same basic process. I'm going to open up a sketch this time on the front plane. And for our geometry, I can draw 2 circles. And really I just want to make these very simple. Not quite ready to go into symmetry yet. Maybe we'll establish some symmetry with a center line or one piece of geometry, but eventually we would mirror this this geometry or create our symmetry. So if we go that route, I don't often use the midpoint line. So in our line we have line, center line, and midpoint line. And midpoint line is going to, we pick the origin, and as I drag it's going to go both directions. And I don't know if it's going to give me that dimension or not, but let's go with 25 before I let go of the left mouse button. Put in the 25 and hit enter. And what that does is it puts in the parameters of 50 millimeter, but there's no dimension to drive it. Alright, so my endpoints are still in blue, and I don't really want this to be an object line for what I'm using it for, so when I select, I'm going to switch it over to for construction, and then we can apply the dimension. And I get the 50 millimeters, which is what I entered. So that portion of it, it maybe saves me 1 step, but I'm not overly fond of the numeric input. It doesn't work with my workflow, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that back off. But it does give me some locations to place my circles, and as long as I can select both of those, so select the first circle, hold down the control button, select the second circle, and I'm going to set those to make equal or come over to the left and equal. Then I'm going to do the smart dimension. So before I apply that smart dimension, let's take one quick look at the parameters again. This is a diameter, so radial dimension would be 5. And again, I can put that parameter in, and it sets the value, but these are still movable. If I grab it, it's going to drag. I'm going to see that number moving. Only the dimension is going to cause this to go fully defined, to cause the geometry to go from blue to black. So we put in the 10, and then I'm going to draw another circle. And this will be the radius of 9 for both ends. So times 2 will give me 18. Alright, so I can apply that, go back into the circle, pick up my endpoint, and so I'm watching for that little yellow button to pop up, the little yellow box. So that one's showing me the midpoint, also happens to be the origin. And just in the frame is picking up the endpoint for it to be concentric. And we're not concerned about its size. I can again come over and put in the radius of 9, which makes it the right size. And right click and select or escape on the keyboard, but it's still able to move. Alright, so once I hold down the control button, this is still highlighted in blue. I can hold down the control button, hover over the other circle so that it highlights in orange, select it, and then these are going to be equal. Alright, and then I'm going to draw a line. So let me escape out of that. I went up and picked the line, and I'm going to make it coincident. I just have to, coincident to the circle. I just have to be careful that I don't pick up a point that's going to cause this to go coincident with one of the quadrants. So at 0, 90, 180, and 270, we have the quadrants. And depending on what I see in that yellow box, right now I'm coincident, and we're horizontal. I picked up a horizontal, and that one's showing a tangency. So let's see what we get. So tangent isn't really what I want. This went fully defined. It inferred tangency to this circle. It saw it. It was close enough. I didn't change it. And actually, do we have a dimension? It might be tangent. No, we don't have a dimension, so that may be my dimension. Alright, well, we can always come back and change it if we wanted to have the 10 millimeters. Alright, so if it infers a relation that you don't want, I can highlight that tangency and tangent 6 to tangent 6. If I hit delete on the keyboard, that's going to give me the ability now to move this, and the ends will stay coincident, and I'll be able to adjust that thickness. So again, if there's missing dimensions, you can assume, you can make your choices, decide what you want it to look like, and then we'll go from there. All right, so we set up and established symmetry with the center line at the midpoint making equal. Now I'm going to use symmetry by selecting the line, holding down the control button, and selecting the center line. Whenever I have that center line, now I'm going to be able to mirror entities. Once I mirror the entities, then I can place that dimension. So if I want it to be 10, same diameter, 8, now I have the ability to adjust it where the tangent driving it was forcing it to be the same as whatever on the diameter. Now we have the ability to move it. So we have to make those decisions as we go. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at 10. And then my next choice is going to be, do I want to trim these geometries out? My personal preference is to leave it. We have the ability to pick contours in regions, and I'll come back and put the 5 millimeter radius in as a fillet feature in each of the corners, and then I don't have to include that geometry. All right, but if I did want to trim it out, we would come up to Trim Entities, and wherever I select, I like Trim to Closest. Power trim is going to be wherever you drag it's going to cut, and so in this case it's not really the best. Don't have corners, I don't have trim away inside, trim away outside. If I'm going to trim, I'm usually just going to trim to closest, and our options here, keep trim entities as construction geometry. Don't remember that one, so it must have been added in the last version or so. And ignore trimming of construction geometry. So in that case, we could potentially bypass that center line. All right. So for this example, I'm going to trim this side, and I'm going to leave the other side just as a comparison. You can go ahead and trim or leave both for this example. And if I wanted, then I would go to the sketch fillet and I would put in the 5 millimeter and the 5 millimeter. I want to leave this a little consistent, so I'm gonna stay with the feature fillet. All right, so the thickness is 5 millimeters. I'm gonna go up to the Features tab, go into my extruded boss base, and put in the 5 millimeters. All right, so because this circle, instead of making one consistent shape that it can calculate, it has this two separate regions. So as these highlight, because of that intersecting, that overlapping geometry, it automatically goes into selected contours. So contours in regions are, a contour would be the outside shape if it was all the way around, and the regions are what is highlighting the donut and kind of the key shape. So if I pick and I pick, that's going to give me the geometry. If you trimmed out both sides, it should automatically go to 5 millimeters. You won't see selected contours. You would just have the net result. All right, so that gives us our shape. And then I'm going to pick the corner geometry, go into the fillet, and we said the fillet was 5 millimeters. And so when I pick the other fillet, then I'm going to wait, and that pop-up connected to start loop, everything, and then connected to the edges. So I just want those internal, and we'll go ahead and accept. Alright, so I'm going to save this. The first one is the crank, and we save. And I'm going to immediately either come back up to the standard toolbar and go to Save As, so that I can create the follower. And if I save as copy and continue, then it will stay within the crank part file. But if I save as copy and open, now we went from crank to follower, and if I go over to the window, I can see that the base is open, the crank is open, and the follower is open. Alright, the follower right now is still the same as the crank, so we're looking to generate the new geometry. So I can expand out, double click the sketch, and the difference here is if I rotate over a little bit, I'm going to see all of the sketch dimensions. If I go to Boss Extrude 1, somewhere in here I'm also going to see the depth of the extrude. And usually that shows up in a different color. Oh, there it is. The extension lines are in that darker blue, where the extension lines of the sketch are in black. Alright, so the follower is 80 millimeters, and nothing happened, which is kind of to be expected. We need to rebuild. So when I hit the rebuild, it's going to stretch it out, and we can save it. And then I can go through, and same as hitting the save icon, I can come over to the file pull down and hit Save As, and the follower will now be the coupler. And I want to do the same thing, save as copy and open. So now I'm going to have all 4 pieces open in the file. So in years past, versions past, we wanted to be a little careful about how many open files, that if we ran out of RAM memory and started having issues, it could crash the software. So I've put in the 160. If I want to regenerate the value now, I'm going to go ahead and hit the little stoplight and let it update, and then go ahead and accept. Alright, so I double check my my file name, coupler, and then save it, and now we have our 3 parts fairly quickly.